I'm first going to analyze the RA8 and RA10 formative assessment and summative assessment. The first target that I am going to analyze is RA8. In RA8, you evaluate different documents, address the content, style, and purpose, or the problem within the text. In the formative assessment, I left out details to support my purposes of the text, but in the summative assessment, I gave an example of why I chose that to be my purpose. Here I wrote, they are both meant to make people aware of what events are transpiring at war. I did not include what actions they were taking to do this. So you wrote, so they do what? That's a very good question. In the summative assessment, I wrote, both texts are fighting for freedom, but I also gave an example of what they were doing to fight for freedom. I wrote, they asked people to follow them and be a part of their movement. I can use this skill in college by when I'm given a text that I don't completely understand, I will be able to pull out the purpose and go from there. I'm going to use the same artifact, RA8, RA10 formative assessment and test to analyze the target RA10. The specific part of RA10 that I'm going to talk about is we compared two different texts and we had to choose which one was more effective and why. In the formative assessment, I only talked about one of the texts and I didn't explain why the other one wasn't effective. In the summative assessment, I referenced both texts, and I referenced them together, and then I referenced them individually. This is a picture of the summative assessment. As you can tell, I underlined the places where I referenced both the text, the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech, and Emma's speech. I will use this in my future career of being a doctor by comparing different patient care plans to decide what would be best for my patient. The next thing that I'm going to show my improvement on is the discussion board feedback. The target that this covers is SL1C. For this assignment, we were set in a group and all given the same book. We read the book in class every other day, and after reading, we would have discussions. In these discussions, we would ask questions, do the summary of what we read, make predictions, etc. As you can see, the top of the picture is the first feedback. I got a 3 on my feedback because I only used level 1 or 2 questions. Now I use a combination of 1, 2, and 3 level questions, so I received a 4. I can also use this in my career to discuss with coworkers, ask good questions to better myself and my patient. I also improved on target RI9, evaluating claim and evidence. While evaluating the claim and evidence, we also do things like pick out if the author made any errors in sentence structure, grammatical errors, etc. And we also tell whether all the details are relevant, there's enough of the details, and if they're good or not. In the first practice, I did not answer all the questions all the way, and I didn't use direct quotes for my examples. But in another practice later on, I did use direct quotes, and I made sure that I answered all the questions completely. Although the pencil is hard to read, this is my first formative assessment on the standard. At the top, in blue writing, you questioned on my first answer why I didn't add in some details that I could have added in. It's because my question was not completely answered, and that's why I received such a low score. In my later formative assessment, I used all the details that I needed to use, and I even used direct quotes later on in question number 3. I will be able to use this in college while I'm researching to write essays. The next artifacts that I'm using is my persuasive writing formative assessment and my summative essay. This will be target W1. I'm specifically going to evaluate my counterclaim, W1C. For a counterclaim in an essay, you have to address the other side and then directly crush it. In my persuasive writing formative assessment, I did directly address the other side, but I did not crush all the options. I talked about students that were 18 years old, but I never talked about students that were under 18 years old. On the summative essay, I addressed and directly crushed it. This is a picture of my formative assessment. You can see in the first sentence that I talked about 18-year-olds. Nowhere else in this paragraph did I talk about anyone else that wasn't 18. Now that I know how to properly write a counterclaim, I can use this in college when I write my essays. My next artifacts and what I've improved on is my RI6 formative and my RI6 summative. In RI6, you are given a quote and you have to tell what it meant and what figurative language tricks are used. In the formative assessment, I didn't break it down enough at first. I wrote things down before I even thought it through. I also used the wrong figurative language trick. In the summative, I evaluated better, I understood what I was reading, and I found the right figurative language trick. In the formative assessment, I got a quote, "The government is sort of a wooden gun to the people themselves." I said that the government is dangerous because a gun is dangerous. But really, it says the gun is wooden, so that would be the complete opposite. Also, down here on number 5, it says that the figurative language trick, I wrote symbolism, but really it was simile. I will use this throughout college for when I'm reading something that I might not understand. My next artifacts are a positive sentence play and a short story that I wrote. The target is L2A, appositives. What I did in these artifacts is I learned how to write in a positive throughout my sentence play, and later on I used it in a short story. I got better when I started out with my sentence play, I had no clue what an appositive was, and by the end I was able to use it without being instructed. Here is my appositive sentence play. One of the sentences that I wrote is, "Pineapple, a fruit with sharp daggers on the outside and is surprisingly sweet on the inside." Here is where I used an appositive in a short story. I wrote, "Dracula, a feckless, evil mastermind, is known for his cruel oxymorons he played on young kids." I can use this in college to spice up some of the papers that I send in. My next artifact is another sentence play that I used. Prepositions. L2. In a sentence play, we learn the definition of the preposition, and then we get an example, and then we get to write our own. I don't have an example of where I use this in another text, but I just thought it was cool to be able to learn just a new way to write. Here is my example of the sentence play that I wrote on prepositions. Although the pineapple was thrown across the island, no one was there to receive it. I will use this a lot in college when I'm writing papers because it is very good to use transition words. That way everybody knows what we're talking about. The last artifact that I'm using is a sentence play game that we used in class. This covers all of the L2 standards. For the game, we were given a sheet of paper that had many sentences written on it, and we had to tell what sentence play was used in those sentences. This is one of the papers we were given throughout the game. As you can see on the left, there are green slashes through some of the letters. That means that I originally got those wrong, but I was able to fix them and I could now get them all right. After learning all of these sentence plays, it made me a better writer, and I know I will be able to use all of these throughout my essays in college.